Welcome, everyone. This is Sheila Cook at 3LM. It's the 2nd of October, 2021, and I'm so pleased to have Philip Gregory with us tonight, talking about his work, his new book called Pathway to Regeneration. And my husband, Christopher, and I, we got to meet Philip and his wife, Jackie, a few years ago. And what they do is when they take a holiday, they intentionally go somewhere and bring this message about regeneration. And they happen to come to Penrith, of all places, where we happened to live at the time. And we got wind of them. They contacted us and let us know they were coming. They spoke at Newton Rig. It was a jam-packed audience, and people were literally just hanging on the edge of their seats the entire time. And I had so many people come up and talk with me afterwards and say, how do we do what he was talking about? So it's really exciting. I'm going to let him tell his story, though. And so it's such a delight to have you with us tonight, Philip. And how this will work, we're being recorded, so if you want to hear it later, you can. I'll send that link to everybody, and please share it with others. And Philip really is going to probably fill an hour of talking. If you have a question just to clarify something, just drop it into the chat and I may interrupt him. Otherwise, all the big questions, let's save them for the end, and the last half an hour we'll address your big questions. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and Phil, if you could open up your screen and share on your side, that would be great. And he's coming to us from Vancouver today. It's so much fun that we can do this. We can share with all corners of the world through this technology. So that's another reason we're doing it in the evening, because it's Phil's morning. Okay. Oh, there you go. Over to you, Phil. Oh, and remember to unmute. Sorry, I muted everybody a while back. I didn't tell you.
All right, I hope you can all hear me. So I'm very pleased to be with you all. We're calling in from our home on Bowen Island in British Columbia. It's not too far from Vancouver, and it's around 11:30 our time. So this is a very polite time for a request to talk. So the title of my book, the title of my talk is basically the title of my book. And here it is. Its subtitle is An Astrophysicist's Journey into Food, Health, Climate, and Complexity. And so it's a big transition for me, a really big transition. 6 years ago, I knew very little about agriculture. And so what got me started on this journey was an announcement by the United Nations that there's only 60 years of farming left due to soil degradation. And this came like a bolt of lightning out of the blue. I had no inkling that there was a looming collapse in agriculture. And one thing you may not know is we have 14 grandchildren and 2 great-grandchildren. And so we're constantly thinking about the future. And so I decided that I had to really, and by the way, your environmental secretary, Michael Gove, warned, I seem to have part of my screen blocked off. Let me just try shifting pictures around. Warned that the UK is 30 to 40 years away from eradication of soil fertility. So what are the primary causes of soil degradation? They include plowing or tilling, chemical intensive farming, current livestock management, deforestation, and industrial or urban uses. And about 1/3 of the world's soil has already been degraded. So here's another way of looking at this. For every ton of food produced, we lose 7 tons of soil. That's pretty shocking. It's clearly unsustainable. Now I wonder if I can shut down some of these things at the top of my screen or move them around. Or maybe I'll put it on the side. No.
We see everything fine on our side.
Okay, I can't see my screen. Maybe I'll put it over here. Okay.
We're just seeing that.
Yes, I appreciate that you can see it. I just want to be able to see it myself. So I've tried to characterize my 6-year journey with this wiggly yellow line. And these are the various topics that I traveled through, various subjects that I had to investigate. Because once I started pulling on this thread of how to stop the looming collapse of agriculture, all these other connected issues came forward. And to guide me on this journey, I had a couple of quotes that kept me moving in the right direction. Namely, that we can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them. That, of course, many people recognize as what came from Albert Einstein. And people are fed by the food industry, which pays no attention to health, and are healed by the health industry, which pays no attention to food. So these were items that were pressing when I was going through this work. And I was constantly on the lookout for outliers, people that were well qualified, but perhaps had a different point of view that I could follow up on. So here are my findings. Most of the existential threats humanity faces are unintended consequences of the mismanagement of our tools and technology. Industrial agriculture is a war against nature in the false belief that humans are separate from nature. Life as normal is leading us to extinction. How many times have you heard that recently? There's been amazing advances have been made in the last 20 to 30 years, and especially in the arena of soil biology and understanding nature's complexity. There is a way forward, partnering with nature. And holistic management provides planning and decision-making tools for working with nature that balances key environmental, social, and economic considerations. So here's the good news, which is what my talk is mainly about. If we change the way we do agriculture in response to the recent revolution in soil biology and nature's complexity, we can rapidly reverse soil degradation, avoid the looming collapse of agriculture, reduce chronic disease epidemics, and go a long way to solving global warming. And of course, we also have to rapidly reduce fossil fuel emissions. These issues are all connected, and the solution may not be that expensive, as nature can do a lot of the work. path forward is to work with nature's biological solutions. So let's check them out. So of the topics that I investigated for this book, I've highlighted 3 in yellow, and those are the ones I'll devote some time to tonight. And so we'll start with soil biology, soil food web, and microbes. So microbes are the secret behind healthy soil. Each teaspoon of healthy soil contains as many microbes as the population of humans on Earth. And in the past 30 years, science has begun to draw back the curtain on this invisible universe. So here we have a symphony of nature, which is often referred to as the soil food web. And we can see some of the microscopic and visible actors. Understanding their role is key to appreciating the new revolution in soil biology. I put it into some pencil mode now. How do I get out?
Okay,
of that?
you want to exit out of the
I wonder if I can.
annotation.
You can't just get rid of all these things at the top of my screen. I'm having to shuffle it around because it's covering my screen, even though it's not covering yours.
Are they Zoom things? Is that what
Yeah,
they
they're
are?
Zoom things.
Click the X. You don't need that stuff.
Yeah, I
Did
don't
you
see
do
an
that?
X though. There isn't
Okay.
one.
I'm not sure what things you're seeing, but
Well, it's mute, stop video, participants, chat, and I can either put it at the top of the screen or I can put it at the bottom of the screen.
oh, okay.
But then it's always blocking something, right? So
That's just the way Zoom is. I'm sorry about
I
it.
guess I'll just have to move them around. But
I wonder if
occasionally
there's a
I
way
do
to
something.
hide them. Let's see.
Yeah, let's see. No. Oh, well, I'll do my best. If you think of something, that's fine.
Okay.
So I've highlighted, circled bacteria and fungi, which form the base of this predator-prey relationship. If you do DNA analysis on a gram of soil, you can easily find about 100,000 different varieties of bacteria and fungi. So keep in mind that there's a tremendous diversity of life in that soil at the microscopic level. Now, apart from recycling dead plant and animal matter, the bacteria and fungi are also able to secrete organic acids and enzymes that allow them to basically mine the rocks, the sand, silt, and clay for all the elements that these
Phil, somehow you muted yourself. We've not heard you since you said they were they secreted something and then mined rock. We haven't heard you since then.
Sorry. Yeah, it's this bar that blocks my screen. I wonder if I could make my screen smaller.
Yeah, in the upper right-hand corner, you can play with, there's different views. You can do standard, side by side, gallery. That might help. Do you see the far upper right corner of Zoom?
The more button?
For me, it's view, and it's got 9 dots, and it says view.
Upper right hand corner. No, my screen. So see it. There's this thing here, but I don't have those dots.
You're just gonna have to go.
Yeah. Right. Well, look, I can't, my screen is obviously very different from yours. There isn't a view icon, and there are no 9 dots. So I'll carry on and struggle on with this. Any rate, in 2015, the world learned that the world's largest mining operation is actually run by fungi. And this shows a microscopic view of a thin section of feldspar. And if you look closely, you can see, this is seen under a microscope, of course, and you see these dark tunnels. Those tunnels are made by fungal hyphae that have just burrowed into, using their organic acids, into the rock and are mining it now for all the elements the rock is made. And these fungal hyphae can then, like a pipeline, transfer this back to the plants. And we'll talk more about that. Well, it turns out when we apply fertilizers and pesticides, we're killing off these soil microbes and we're shutting down nature's mining operation. And in the process, as we'll see, we're turning living soil into dirt. In healthy soil, the bacteria and fungi store these elements that they mine in the right proportions and in high concentrations in their bodies because they need them for their own life. Now, here's where we discover the important role of the microscopic predators. When they eat the bacteria and fungi, they don't need such high concentrations of the nutrients. In fact, they can't use the high concentrations of the nutrients, so they poop out the excess in a plant available form. So they're a critical part of transferring nutrients to the plant. We need a hierarchy of predators to preserve a stable balance of predators and prey. In nature, high biodiversity translates to population stability. Now, the bacteria and fungi are concentrated right next to the plant root because the plants attract and feed them. So let me just move this bar around for a moment. So now this slide here illustrates nature's barter system. Plants use photosynthesis to capture sunlight energy and store it in the carbon bonds of the sugar they make. Plants release up to 40% of these carbon compounds as root exudates to attract and feed and power soil microbes. In turn, the microbes carry out nitrogen fixation, mining, and recycling operations to provide all the nutrients plants require. For the microbes, these exudates are like cakes and cookies. They're basically made from carbohydrates. Turns out that plants also release exudates through their foliage. In healthy soil conditions, leaf surfaces are covered by microbes held to the plant by the strong biotic glues. That protective layer is one of nature's ways of achieving this disease suppression. So here's a plot that is one indicator of this recent revolution of soil biology. This is something that I made up at my university library by extracting all scientific papers ever published that contain in the title root exudate or plant exudate. And this is what I got. This is the number of papers published as a function of time. And you can see the first papers came out in about 1938. And then there was a steady drizzle of papers up until 1991. And there was this big jump. And thereafter, it's been going up and up and up. And so this you can think of is when this revolution really got underway. Now, a key paper considered to be a prime catalyst of this recent revolution was published in 1985, about 5 years prior to that. And, you know, this was a big step forward. And I think many people, many workers in the field weren't quite sure whether to believe what these results were. And so it took about 5 years for people to really verify that all this interesting stuff was going on with the microbes. Now, one of the authors was Dr. Elaine Ingham. And in 2016, I registered and completed 4 courses that she taught on the soil food web, on composting, and the use of the soil microscope, which gave me a great deal of insight into these topics. So here's another amazing thing that bacteria and fungi are capable of doing. They actually build soil structure. So the bacteria secrete biotic glues that stick soil minerals and organic matter together in what are called microaggregates. If you look above at this image, you would see a cartoon with a red circle, and that's an example of a microaggregate. The brown particles in there are the mineral particles, and then the green is the organic material, and the blue dots are just the trapped water. Now, the fungal strands tie these microaggregates together to form larger aggregates. So I like to think of the microaggregates as the mini bricks, and the fungal strands are building structures like dwellings with doors and windows to allow air and water in. And they're actually together building underground dwellings for the microbes to live in and work in. Here's a nice example of soil aggregates formed around the plant roots. And of course, they're surrounding the plant roots because the plant is liberating exudates, which are the basic food that powers the microbes. So let's look at what soil looks like, what good soil looks like that has, say, 5% soil organic matter. On the left, you see 45% of that pie is made up of minerals like sand, silt, and clay. But in total, 50% contains trapped air and water. So basically, the air and water is moving into voids in these structures that the microbes create. So the soil microbes build, the soil structure built by microbes are filled with voids that infiltrate air and water. Soil carbon acts as a sponge to store the water. Here are 2 examples of soils. In one case, the one on the left has only 1% organic matter. And you'll notice that the percentage of sand, silt, and clay is much higher. And there's only voids holding, say, 10% air and 15% water. And look at the color of that. It's quite a light color. Whereas compare that now to the sample on the right, which has 10% organic matter, which is very high. And now the percentage of sand, silt, and clay has dropped down to 30%. And notice the air is at 40% here and the water at 30%. I think those are just representative values, but we can actually measure the pore space and quantify it at 70%. And so how it's distributed exactly between air and water is guesswork. Although you can figure that out if you have the density of the soil. You know what the density of the sand, silt, and clay is, and you can then, the density of water and density of air, so you can work it out from that. And notice the dark chocolate color of the sample on the right. That's coming from the carbon content in the soil organic matter, which is, the carbon content is about 58% of the organic matter. This is a very interesting curve because it shows the soil holding capacity depends on soil carbon. So on the vertical axis, we have the soil water holding capacity in the top 12 inches in gallons per acre. And on the bottom, on the horizontal axis, we have the percentage of soil carbon. And it goes from 0 on the left to 6% on the right. Now, native soils contained approximately 4 to 5% carbon. So if you go to say 4.5% carbon on the horizontal axis and go upwards, you intersect the blue curve and you find that that level of carbon in the soil can hold 100,000 gallons of water per acre. Compare or contrast that to the fact that most agricultural soils today have lost most of their carbon, and you're lucky if you've got 1% carbon. And so you have to go down to the other end of the graph here horizontally to 1%. And you can see that soil now can only hold 40,000 gallons per acre. Well, keep in mind that agriculture is responsible for 70 to 75% of global freshwater use. Just imagine the ability of that soil, the potential of that soil to hold 100,000 gallons if it's only holding 40,000 gallons now. How many more plants can you grow? How much longer can you grow those plants? How less affected you will be from drought. So this is a big deal. Now, plowing slices and dices that soil structure built by bacteria and fungi. Just tears through the fungal strands. It just tears through and breaks up these biotic glues. And so we're turning soil structure into a pile of dirt. Notice the gulls feeding on the creatures that are in that soil that are being turned over by the plow. These underground structures can store a lot of water and are home to a diverse ecosystem capable of providing all the nutrients plants require. Now, what happens when we take this living soil with its structure and we spray chemical fertilizers, herbicides, and fungicides? Well, they suppress, kill soil microbes, and shut down nature's barter system. The herbicide glyphosate is a powerful antimicrobial, which in other words, it's a powerful antibiotic. Applying chemical fertilizers has the effect of making plants lazy. Addicted to the inorganic fertilizer, they stop providing the exudates to attract and feed the soil microbes. This disrupts nature's barter system, and it compromises soil structure that the microbes create and maintain. That same soil structure is maintained on its own for about a month. After that, it starts falling apart. So you have to have microbes working continuously to preserve that. Without the biotic glues and fungal strands holding the soil together, the soil is easily washed away by rain or blown away during periods of drought, creating massive dust storms. Here's one in 1935 in Texas. Here's another one in 2011. So even in modern times, we have not learned the lessons of the importance of soil structure and how it's held together by these biotic glues and fungal strands. Some soil scientists look at that and say, wow, look how light that dust is. That means there's hardly any carbon in that material. It just shows how badly we've degraded the soils. So what is wrong with this picture? We have no infiltration. The soil structure is gone. We've turned it all into a pile of dirt. What is wrong with this picture? Imagine the vast quantities of soil that now sit in those rivers and are moving their way to the ocean. Other key services that nature can provide the farmer are contributed by a family of fungi called mycorrhizal fungi. They form fungal networks. So the panel above depicts the root system of two identical plants. The one on the left is planted in dirt, and the one on the right is planted in soil with a healthy food web, giving rise to a mycorrhizal fungal network. This network extends the root area for extracting nutrients and water by hundreds of times. Which of these two plants is going to survive well in a drought? Through the work of researchers like Professor Suzanne Simard of my university, we now know that fungal networks can link plants together in a wood wide web, allowing them to exchange signals and nutrients. Let me just briefly summarize what we've learned about the importance of soil microbes. First of all, they're a big part of nature's barter system. They do nitrogen fixation, recycling dead plant and animal matter, mining the rock, sand, silt, and clay. They fend off pests and pathogens. They build soil structure, which we've just discussed, and mycorrhizal fungi greatly extend root volume and depth, provide a wood wide web for sharing signals and nutrients, transport nutrients to plants. And there's another thing here, which I can't quite read. It's all covered up. Oh yeah, a prime source of stable carbon. All free services that are available if we partner with nature. Pretty impressive. In the 1990s, it was discovered that plowing releases additional soil carbon into the atmosphere as climate warming CO2. Here's the work of Dr. Don Rykowski of the Agricultural Services, Research Services of the USDA. So the figure on the right shows how the CO2 released into the atmosphere increases with plowing depth. You can see on the left-hand side of that picture, there's a soil surface that hasn't been plowed or tilled, and that's releasing 11 grams of CO2 per square meter in a 24-hour period. And that value continuously increases the further you go to the right, where on the right-hand side, we have plowing to a depth of 11 inches. The equipment at the bottom left is what is used for measuring the CO2 emission. It's called Mr. GEM, standing for the Mobile Research Gas Exchange Machine. And basically what it is a plastic box which has been instrumented to measure all of the gas that's given off from the soil into that box over a 24-hour period. So keep in mind that CO2 is colorless and odorless. So the results that we're seeing here on the right, they were very surprising. And here are the results. Plowed to a depth of 11 inches, 15 times as much CO2 was released into the atmosphere during the 24-hour interval following the plowing, compared to no-till. For a time interval of 21 days, so if we extend the measurement time interval to 21 days, post-plowing, the emissions were still 10 times higher. So it's not just a sudden burst of CO2, it carries on, has a long tail to it. And nowadays with powerful tractors, many farmers will find the occasion to plow 5 or 6 times a year. So this is going on a lot. We're losing a lot of CO2, losing a lot of carbon into the atmosphere. And carbon, we now know, is absolutely essential. Well, it's essential for soil fertility, but it's also very essential for holding all that water that we need. Whoops, a daisy. And I clicked something that I shouldn't have clicked. So there are many reasons now to retire the plow. Okay, let me rearrange my screen here. So much of current agriculture is about killing weeds, fungi, insects, biodiversity, and even the farmer's profit. In nature, there are 1,700 beneficial or indifferent insect species for every one pest species. We're focused on killing that one pest, but meanwhile, we're killing everything else. According to entomologist Dr. Jonathan Lundgren, the cause is our current monoculture model of production. We try to keep monoculture production and the factory farming of livestock viable through chemistry, drugs, machinery, genetic engineering, and ultimately cash subsidy. Current agricultural model uses 10 calories of fossil fuel energy to produce 1 calorie of food energy. Before 1940, you could produce 6 calories of food energy for 1 calorie of fossil fuel. I like this diagram here. This is a new report from the Rockefeller Foundation, and it's the estimated true cost of food, which provides further insight into additional harms from industrial agriculture. So the report measures the annual cost of our food system today in trillions of US dollars to our health, the environment, and society. So on the left-hand side, you can see the current national expenditure on food is $1.1 trillion. Of course, this is in the US. And then we'll see in the middle, hidden additional costs amounting to $2.1 trillion. And what are they made of? Again, let me just move things around here. So one contribution is the cost of healthcare for the millions who fall ill with diet-related diseases. And then the contributions to present and future cost of water and air pollution, reduced biodiversity, and greenhouse gas emissions. So those two things together come to a total of $3.2 trillion. And then sitting on top is this green area, which represents other costs excluded due to insufficient data or ethical challenges to assign monetary value. For example, what price do you put on cruelty to animals? And of course, there are some decisions that should only be ethically decided. There should be no price put on them. Otherwise, we'll go down the track to slavery if we're not already on that direction, as far as farm workers are concerned. Okay, let me get rid of this. I'm having all sorts of interesting things pop up on my screen, and I'm having to kill them. I hope they're not of any biological origin. All right. So let me go to the next slide. Okay. So here's a breakdown of the additional costs measured in billions of US dollars annually. So that $2.1 trillion, the biggest sector contributor to it is human health. And you can see, I don't know if you can read the small writing there, but the biggest block there of $604 billion is other non-communicable chronic diseases, such as hypertension, cardiovascular disease, cancer, and diabetes. And so you can see how all those blocks can be added up together to give you this black block at the very far right, which is 2.1 trillion or 2,100 billion dollars. Interestingly enough, the subsidy, which is shown in yellow, is actually quite small compared to these other unintended hidden additions. Poor nutrition is now the leading cause of poor health in the United States. The damage to our health is huge, as COVID-19 has recently brought to light. The majority of adult hospitalizations were attributed to one of these 4 pre-existing conditions: obesity, hypertension, diabetes, and heart failure. And it's now pretty well established that the true cost of food disproportionately burdens people of color. Well, we can see an additional harm that our current food system creates is the bankrupting of farmers by rising input costs. So this is some data that pertains to Canadian farms. And what you see is the upper curve with the blue shading below it is the total gross farm revenue over time. So if you look on the horizontal axis of this graph, it starts on the left at 1929 and goes through to the right up to 2019. And over that period of time, you can see the upper curve has fluctuated, but there's a steady upward trend. Then if you look at the lower curve, that's the total net farm income. That's what the farmer gets before taxes, right? And you can see the share of that revenue has literally collapsed. In the 35-year period from 1985 to 2019, farmer input suppliers of fertilizers, seeds, fuels, pesticides, equipment, banking, accounting services captured 90% of agricultural revenue, amounting to 1.59 trillion out of 1.63 trillion. Canadian taxpayers have subsidized farm income by 119 billion since 1985, and farm debt is now at 115 billion. Most of these farmers have to have off-farm jobs, and because they can't buy the seed, they can only rent it, they have to sign contracts. I'm talking about the GMO seeds. They have to sign contracts with the seed suppliers and the pesticide suppliers, which basically turn over the control of their farm to the suppliers, and they become the caretakers. It's a pretty terrible situation, to the point that most universities now have stopped offering farm education programs, and they leave it up to the industry to provide any instruction, because they don't really believe that farmer can make a living any longer doing industrial agriculture. Now, of course, the very biggest farmers often sneak by and can make a living, but they basically have to take advantage of the farmers that are going bankrupt to acquire that extra land. So the collapse of farm income has gutted rural communities. They've ceased to exist by and large. For too long, we've relied on technology to carry out chemical warfare against microbes, weeds, insects, and nature, only to discover we're killing ourselves. Oops. Another thing pop up here. Let me get rid of that one. Okay. This is like a game, you know, Pac-Man game. All right, let me just see if I can change this. Okay. So for my book, I interviewed Professor Bruce Lanphier, who's at Simon Fraser University in the health sciences. His research helps to quantify and prevent disease arising from toxic chemicals and pollution. Here's what he had to say. We've made so many mistakes over the past century. First, we liberally sprayed our orchards and farms with lead arsenate until it was found to be toxic. Next, we doused them with DDT until it was found to be dangerous. Then we sprayed our farms and gardens with organophosphate pesticides. Whoops, they are poisonous. Today, widespread application of pyrethroids, neonicotinoids, and glyphosate are growing even as new evidence shows they are toxic too. Let me just move this thing. As of 2016, there were 7,355 products registered with Health Canada's Pest Management Regulatory Agency for use in Canada. In the rest of my presentation, I will only focus on glyphosate, the most widely used pesticide in agriculture. All right. So here's an important paper by J.F. Bach in 2002, which highlighted the rapid rise of chronic diseases that were occurring at the same time that modern medicine was bringing about a rapid decline of infectious disease. Today, there is an explosion of 32 different chronic disease epidemics, including asthma, allergies, autism, diabetes, obesity, major depression, cancer, infertility, and the list goes on and on. They're literally exploding in occurrence. In 2015, we had Dr. Martin Blazier's book on how the overuse of antibiotics is destroying beneficial microbes in our gut and fueling our modern plagues. Interestingly enough, glyphosate, the active ingredient in herbicide like Roundup, is a broad spectrum antibiotic. 37 times more glyphosate is used than all the antibiotics in medicine. We can detect it now in basically all of our food staples. Back in 2000, we didn't know about our gut microbiome. We didn't know that our health is dependent on 3 pounds of microbes living in our gut, that these microbes outnumber the cells in our body by 10 times. We depend on these microbes to help digest our food, produce certain vitamins, make neurotransmitters for our brain, and regulate our immune system. Now we know, but are our antibiotics destroying them and us? Well, I put together the following 3 slides, which I'm not going to go through in any detail because they get to be a little bit too detailed for this talk, and I don't have the time, but I've found this one valuable source of information is a testimony by Professor Don Huber to the International Monsanto Tribunal in The Hague, which took place from 2016 to 2017. And if you look and read his pedigree on the left-hand side, you realize that here's somebody that is eminently qualified to speak on these matters. So I'll just jump through the next 2 slides so that they'll get recorded and you'll be able to read them and study them at your own. These are what I consider some key points from Professor Don Huber's testimony. And of course, I've checked these things out from other sources as well. And some of the references are given at the bottom. Here's the second slide. And I'm going to just jump through that. Glyphosate, most heavily used pesticide in the world. Potent herbicide and antibiotic affects all life, basically in all our food staples. Strongly correlated with an explosive growth in chronic diseases. Very persistent in the environment, despite advertising to the contrary. In 1996, New York sued Monsanto over claims its herbicide, including Roundup, were safer than table salt and practically non-toxic, environmentally friendly, and biodegradable. Monsanto agreed to remove the advertising claims in New York State and agreed to pay $50,000 to cover state prosecution costs. In 2001, a French court accused Monsanto of falsely presenting Roundup as biodegradable and claiming that it left the soil clean. Monsanto went on to, take these to further courts and eventually ended up in 2009 in France's Supreme Court, which ruled against Monsanto in support of the 2 lower court rulings. Then in 2015, glyphosate declared a probable carcinogen by the World Health Organization. And then May 2019, a California jury ruled Monsanto must pay a couple $2 billion in the largest verdict yet over cancer claims. And then December 28th in 2020, the same state that had sued Monsanto earlier in 1996, the governor signed into law a statewide glyphosate ban. So it's illegal, prohibits the use of glyphosate on any state property. And the last thing on the slide, which is completely covered up for me, so bear with me whilst I move my guide around. May 2021, Mexican judge rejects industry bid to halt GMO corn and glyphosate ban. So Mexico will completely ban GMO corn and glyphosate by 31st of January 2024. So hopefully other countries will follow suit, but there's no sign of anything happening like that in my country. Oops, a daisy. All right, let's shift things around. Okay. In 1965, 4% of the US population had a chronic disease. By 2021, close to 50% of children have a chronic disease. Sperm counts have dropped by more than 50% in under 40 years in America, Europe, Australia, and New Zealand. Here's some comments on the impending collapse of public health. In the US, chronic disease accounts for 86% of the total 3.8 trillion annual health costs. The explosive rise of chronic diseases equates then to a collapse of public health. This systemic collapse of public health is not being adequately recognized. COVID-19 is unmasking the dire health issues in the population, with 94% of the deaths are from patients with at least one underlying comorbidity. To shift from managing symptoms, which are hugely profitable for the pharmaceutical industry, to identifying systematic root causes to regenerate human health. The good news is that 75% of chronic metabolic disease is preventable by improved diet. So we need to change the way we see these issues. We're spending a huge amount of money treating the symptoms of preventable chronic diseases. What if we saw food as medicine and paid farmers a decent living to produce the very best of this food medicine to deal with the root causes of these problems? This is just simply simple societal math. We're spending the money anyway. Why not do some good with it? We clearly have to change the way we do agriculture. If we use our new knowledge of soil biology, we can farm in ways that don't require all these chemicals that are killing life on this planet. So here's one answer. Copy nature, save the planet, save money. Move to regenerative agriculture, which is a system of farming and gardening which prioritizes soil health across all areas of land use. It mimics nature to rebuild healthy soil through biology. Sequesters atmospheric carbon and builds soil carbon sponge. Well, I won't go through all of these because I realize now I'm running low on time. So let's move on. Since most agricultural soils have been degraded, this is not a situation we want to sustain. We need to move beyond sustainability to regenerative agriculture. And here's a classic example of what you can do. Here, that fence line separates a desertifying piece of land where the livestock are being removed. And on the left-hand side, we see land that is now flourishing in grass through the use of regenerative holistic grazing. Here are the 6 principles of regenerative agriculture. The bottom 5, many of you might have seen before: limit disturbance, no bare soil, build diversity, keep living roots in the ground, and integrate animals. If you do those things, the reason why they work is because we're mimicking nature. This is what nature does. The new 6th principle is context. And that's a little different, but context lies beyond any immediate goal or problem and reduces the likelihood of unintended consequences. And like I say, almost all the existential threats that we face are unintended consequences of our mismanagement of our tools and technology. How rapidly can we increase soil organic matter? I want to show you a few examples here. First example is Gabe Brown's farm. I don't know how many of you heard of that gentleman, but he's one of the pioneering farmers. He's a great speaker. He travels the world talking about what he's done on his farm. And he's drawn so much interest to his farm that scientists are, trying to take samples left, right, and center to monitor what is he actually achieving. And so we have got some measurements, quite a lot of measurements for that particular farm. And this shows some of the results, and in particular, spanning the time period from 1993 to 2013. When he started in 1993, he went no-till. And at that point, his initial organic matter was 1.7%. Then in 1995, he added diversity to his cash crops. And by that time, he moved up to 2% organic matter. 1997, he added cover crops. And by that time, it's 3.1%. And then he went to multiple species cover crops, which allowed him to extend the growing season. And then multiple species covers with livestock integration. And now he's up to 6.1% organic matter. And then by 2013, he's now up to 11.1% organic matter. Now keep in mind that the soil organic carbon content is approximately 58% of the organic matter. So up here at 11.1% organic matter, he's about 6.5% soil carbon. Whereas before, when he started, he was less than 1% soil carbon. Here's what it looks like when you plot the data points, and you can see, which perhaps affect what contribution that he made the biggest contribution to the improvement in the soil fertility or the soil carbon. And the biggest jump he gets is when he adds livestock integration. But all the others are significant. Now, keep in mind that his knowledge of regenerative agriculture was evolving tremendously over that time. In 1993, he didn't understand why, but people were advising him to do no-till, and that's all they could afford to do. Imagine what he would have done if he had done all of these things at the same time. The time it would take to increase the soil carbon could have been much shorter. We won't really know. I'll jump over this slide. I want to show some other results. This is from Dr. David Johnson at New Mexico State University. And he did this rather interesting experiment to see how rapidly he could increase soil carbon by growing a diversity of cover crops, cutting them down and disking them back into the soil. So he wasn't actually selling anything off this. He just wanted to do this experiment. How rapidly can I just use cover crops to grow the soil organic matter, to increase the soil carbon? And so the way he did this is he started the one-time application of 400 to 500 pounds per acre of what he calls beam compost. Beam is this biologically enhanced agricultural management which uses a high fungal compost, which is generated from his own invention, which is he and his wife invented this Johnson-Su compost bioreactor. And one of its virtues is it makes very high fungal to bacterial ratio compost. At any rate, the result was pretty amazing in that he got an annual increase of 0.24% carbon without having to use livestock at all. Now, if he had used livestock, he probably would have got a much higher value. But still, that's amazing. That's 10.7 metric tons of carbon added each year to every hectare of land. That's a remarkably high level of carbon sequestration. Let's look at the next one. I think we've got maybe a little bit more time. So here are 6 farms that are all practicing what we call AMP grazing, which is another word for holistic grazing. It's a regenerative grazing form. And what's plotted is the soil organic matter versus time over 4 years, a span of 4 years. And you see they're all going up. And the rate at which they're building carbon in the ground, whoops, Daisy got too far. I had to move again. This thing that's covering my screen. Oh, come on, where are you? So the average annual increase in soil organic carbon was in the range 0.17% to 0.42%. That's the annual increase. That's pretty amazing. Okay, let's look at the final example here. This is Will Harris's ranch, White Oak Pastures in Southwest Georgia. He also does holistic grazing. In fact, his ranch is one of the nodes in the Savory Hub, one of the Savory hubs for training people on holistic grazing. And so over a 20-year period, he increased his soil carbon from 0.75% to 7.9%, which is, again, a very high rate of carbon sequestration. So there are lots of examples of this around the world. I've just picked these ones because I'm more aware of these. So I want to finally conclude then with the ABCD of agriculture, inspired by the work of Australian scientist Walter Jenna, which shows a nice comparison of regenerative agriculture to industrial agriculture. Again, I'll have to reorganize my slide here. So A stands for agriculture, with the current focus on maximizing yield of the above ground green growth, roughly 40% of the plant. There's still a lot going on underground, including, of course, the root exudates. B stands for burn. Industrial agriculture is all about oxidization. You clear the forest, you burn it, you plow, you fertilize, you add biocides, and you fallow fields in the off season. All these practices lead to the loss of soil carbon. So you can see the CO2 rising up in the atmosphere, the nitrous oxide rising up in the atmosphere, methane. And another characteristic of industrial agriculture is high input costs, which is unsustainable and bankrupting the farmers. So I've got a big red X over that. C stands for carbon. Regenerative agriculture employs nature's barter system. Root exudates feed soil microbes in return for essential nutrients, sequesters carbon, builds the soil carbon sponge. Minimum soil disturbance, preferably no-till, minimize bare soil, and on and on. And then D stands for dividends. So these are all the things that, if you do regenerative agriculture, these are the dividends that you get. And those dividends feed back in a positive way to the objective of growing above ground crops and feeding us. So, my last slide. Drifting together through space on our small blue lifeboat called Earth, guided by our new understanding of soil biology and nature's complexity, we urgently need to pull together to survive and prosper. So let's start rebuilding the soil biology and putting carbon back in the soil. All right, well, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Phil. We really appreciate that. And now I'd like to invite our audience to put questions into the chat. And yeah, I think we can just have our webcams on now. And so it was so rich and well researched, and you explain it so clearly that even we non-scientists can really understand it. Thank you so much. Well, while I'm waiting for questions from our audience, I have a question, and that is, what really gives you hope today? What's inspiring you and fills you with hope?
I have to say that, well, one thing that the hope comes from is my wife and I are both part of a group on our island called Bowen Island Food Resilience Society. And we're trying to do whatever we can to improve food resilience. And of course, the backbone of our activities has to do with regenerative agriculture, the underlying principles that we want to use. And one of the developers on the island who had some about 4 acres of agricultural land reserve, which was part of his development, decided that he'd like to donate that to a community organization to be run for community agriculture. And so they invited us to manage this. And we started off with just our core group of 7 individuals. And we put out that we'd be interested in volunteers. And in the little over a year that we've been in operation, we've had an amazing number of volunteers come. They seem to be, amazing interested in the underpinnings of regenerative agriculture, and they really want to learn. They're wanting to do it in their own garden. And of course, COVID came along, and it created somewhat of a shortage in various commodities, and people immediately became concerned about food. And so we're finding that many people have taken their flower gardens and converted them to vegetable gardens. And they're wanting to do things just like we want to do things. And so I think understanding and learning about these things is very rewarding. And it really gives one a sense that you are, and if enough of us do it, that we will make a difference and we will shift the ball into that court. And so those are all things that give me hope.
Great, thank you. We've got a question here from Hillary, and Hillary is wondering, what have been the big new insights since your excellent talk in Penrith? What's been new for you?
Right. Well, I've done a lot of research, additional research, to write this book that I've been working on. And so I've dug more deeply into for example, what is being the nutrient loss? What are the factors controlling nutrition of our food? And so I've learned a great deal about that subject that I didn't know before. And I think, there's more good information that's being published every day on that subject. one of the things that I learned is that, for example, in the last, I think 15 years or so, it's longer than that. I think it's about 30 years. There's been about 14 different variants of broccoli that have been developed. And you would think, well, maybe they're producing more nutritious food. But of course, the quality that they're after is a larger and larger head. And so what's happening then to the nutrition of that? Well, you can draw a graph, and if you plot the nutrition, meaning the mineral content versus the carbohydrate content, you find that the nutrition has been going down and down. So the bigger head you make, it doesn't follow that a proportionate increase occurs in the mineral content. And it doesn't, apparently. And so that's something we need to be aware of, that the motivation to develop a new variety because it's perhaps gives a larger yield, or perhaps because it's drought resistant, often the process by which they develop that variety, and what they'll do is they'll do breeding programs, and they typically will breed and put the seedling into sterile soil and then add chemicals like the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, and then try and pick out the plant that does the best in that situation. Of course, that sterile soil is deficient and devoid of the biology that we've been talking about. And so the more they do that, the less that plant, this new variety, relates to any biology, to the extent that some of them that used to like mycorrhizal fungi and benefit from them no longer have a relationship with them. So these are things that we have to be aware of and be, and this is where we really need government money to be used to finance research in universities, independent scientists, rather than those that are really after selling you a variety because they can advertise a bigger head and make more money from it, but not go to the trouble of measuring the nutrition loss, right? So that's been a concerning issue, and it's solvable, but we have to be aware of it to start with.
Thank you, Phil. We've got quite a few more questions, and I see, Hugh, you've got your hand raised, but if you wouldn't mind, please put your question into the chat, and I'm just going to take them in the order that they've come in. Paul says, does climate change activism and the obsession with reducing the use of fossil fuels distract us from the more important work that you are advocating? What do you think about that?
Well, that's a very good question, and it brings up one of the new things that I learned, and that is we've got ourselves into a pretty desperate strait in climate change, even if we are successful in sequestering carbon, whether it's in the soil or whether it's by some technological means, we're not going to see an immediate benefit in any short term, simply because there's this equilibrium that exists between the carbon in the soil, the carbon in the atmosphere, and the carbon in the ocean. So as we've increased the carbon coming out of our fossil fuel operations, increasing the carbon in the atmosphere, the ocean has been accepting some of that carbon to its own detriment through, causing acidification. But if we all of a sudden now stop using fossil fuels and start pulling carbon out of the atmosphere, well, because there's this equilibrium between all three events, the ocean is going to sense that and decide, let's get rid of some of this excess carbon that's giving us a problem. So they're going to start putting it back up into the atmosphere. So the atmospheric CO2 is not going to change very much for quite a long while. Okay, so what do? Well, it turns out if we sequester carbon by building the soil carbon sponge, you recognize that we're able to make the rainfall that does happen much more effective, because with all that porous soil, it can absorb now, it can infiltrate a lot more water. It can store a lot more water. So it can now grow a lot more green plants, and a lot more photosynthesis will happen. Well, and one of the functions that happens when you grow a plant is those plants transpire water. They transpire and evaporate water. And that operation of transpiring and evaporation, it cools the surface of the earth. It acts as a refrigerator. It's exactly what it does. It refrigerates. And so we need to have more plants growing to get more refrigeration happening, so we can balance the extra heat that's coming in. And it's possible to do that and to balance the excess heat that's coming in by growing 4% more plants. And to grow that 4% extra plant coverage on the earth, we need the extra water to infiltrate and store, because water is often a limitation to how many plants we can grow, how much we can grow. So we're going to rely on plants to keep our planet cool until such time as we can pull down enough carbon and the ocean's re-equilibrated and it doesn't want to keep pumping huge amounts into the atmosphere. So we're going to rely on soil biology to get us through this crisis.
Thank you. And our next question relates to water from Chris. 70 to 75% water use is attributable to agriculture. Where does this figure come from? Do you know how that's calculated?
Yeah, I don't know if I put that, probably it's not on that slide, but I originally Googled to find out how much it was, and then I got some papers, and I do have, the references for that. I'd be happy to provide Chris with a reference.
Okay, thank you. And Carla says, it seems to me that your arguments are unanswerable, but do you think we have time to persuade the rest of the world before it's too late? One only has to see the pictures of the Amazon burning. How do we persuade others?
Well, one encouraging sign for me is that just recently, the British Columbia government, and if you take a look at agriculture in BC, it's 95% plus industrial agriculture using the chemicals and the fertilizers, and they just produced a report that would indicate that this report now is a year, maybe 2 years old. But just this summer, in fact, this last month, they hosted a meeting. This was the Minister of Agriculture on regenerative agriculture and agri-tech. And so my wife and I attended that, and guess who the keynote speaker was? Well, Gabe Brown, right? And the theme of the meeting was, well, agri-tech would then be in support of this major initiative, which would be regenerative agriculture. So I'm seeing a rapid turnaround, evidence for. Will that be translated into action? That remains to be seen, but that's just occurred, right, in my province. Anybody like to share another example that they've witnessed?
Sorry, I'm on mute. Our next question is from Craig, and he says, where do we start? In the USA, the agriculture is closely tied to the Farm Bill and agriculture policy? How do we change the focus of farm policy?
Yeah. Well, I know that one source that I monitor quite regularly is the Organic Consumers Association, because they often will have expose people that are well, expose is the wrong word. They will often highlight good work that's being done by some organizations in trying to change farm bills. And I don't know what it's like in the UK, but in Canada, we have a number of organizations, and of course, Greenpeace is worldwide, that are very active in policy issues as well. So that's really all I have to offer at the moment.
What I could add about policy is Alan Savory studied policy quite in detail and historically. And what he discovered is it's really impossible for governments to get out ahead of people. And so policy really needs to almost follow people. And I didn't believe that was true, even though I got a whole lecture on it from Alan. I thought, that can't be right. Until actually I experienced it directly myself. And we were invited to go and talk with agricultural policy makers in Scotland, and there were a number of them, and they were really excited to meet us. And we told them all about holistic management. They said, oh, that's exactly what we wish our farmers would do here. And they said, actually, we've tried to take baby steps towards what you're talking about, and we've put in place certain policies. And every single time, the farmers find a way to get around it. And so what we've learned from that is, unless the farmer really believes in it, it doesn't matter what the policy is. And that's when I go, that the light bulb came on. That's what Alan meant when he said the government can't get ahead of the people. The people really have to be behind policy for it to work. And ever since then, I've never tried to influence policy. And instead, I try to influence people.
Yeah, I like to think that when I go around and give these talks, that's exactly what I'm doing, right? Hopefully.
Yep, one mind at a time. That's how I look at it. Okay, let's get something new here. Here, Hugh, do you think that the way forward is big ag or smaller scale family farms providing circular economy farming, supplying communities independently of government support, i.e. the taxpayer backs the producer on the merits of how they farm directly?
Well, I certainly strongly support circular agriculture, in the sense that this linear approach of putting in more and more inputs and pumping out more food, but more and more pollution and damage is just not sustainable. So we have to go to circular, the nature's cycles. And I am, I've studied, in my book, I give many examples of small market farms. And I've looked at their economics and, well, what are they able to achieve in terms of the productivity? And basically, by doing intensive biological farming, you can produce an awful lot of food, to the point that it's ridiculous to not do that, right? In fact, there are studies that have been done which compare the yield from the smallest of farms to the yield of the largest farms. And what you find is, and of course, the agronomists that even make these graphs say, well, look, it's not about yield, it's about how efficient can a single farmer produce a certain quantity. But if you strictly restrict yourself to, well, how much can you get from an acre of land yield, it turns out that this graph that I could share is the yield at the lowest end, the smallest of farmers. The yield is 13 times that of the largest of farms. Wow, what could we do with 13 times more food? Amazing, right? What could we do if we also decided that food is really medicine? And we pay people to make this medicine so that we won't be desperately ill. So I think that local small farms are a way forward. There's no question about it. We have to get rid of these near monopolies. There's no two ways about it.
Thank you for that, Phil. Tony and Andrea Momberg up in Oregon, they call their meat medicine meat that they grow.
Good for them.
We've got time for one more question. And I'm choosing Jean's question from South Africa. And he's been through our training, and he's also a professor in South Africa. He says, Phil, did you know that plant hair roots can also excrete antibiotics when damaged through warming action through soil particles? These antibiotics end up killing microbes just around that damaged area. The dead microbes then release their high concentration of NP and K, which gets absorbed by the roots. Any comments? I didn't know any of that.
Right. I wasn't aware of that specifically, but I'm aware that there is a new mechanism. The exact name of it escapes me, where microbes, in particular bacteria, can be ingested at the tip of the plant roots. And once ingested, it's like they move along almost on an assembly line. First of all, their outer membranes are stripped off. They give up nutrients, and then they are eventually released back into the soil. It's almost like a conveyor belt that's extracting nutrients from the microbes. It's
Wow.
a new mechanism.
You're saying plants are carnivorous?
Yes, in that sense, although the microbes are recycled, right?
Wow.
Now, it's a fairly new mechanism, and so one of the things that hasn't been quantified yet is how significant a contribution of the nutrients comes that way versus these other mechanisms, right? But that sounded a little bit like what our South African friend was mentioning.
Yeah. Well, that's so
Except nothing to do.
fascinating. It's so fascinating. I'm so glad we had you here tonight, Philip. And thank you, Jackie, for being with us. Jackie, do you have anything? You've been sitting there the whole time. I wonder if you have something you'd like to add. I'm guessing you do. What would you like to add, Jackie?
I don't know. I really like the comment about the small farms, because I really think that's important, and that's where the change is happening, is in the small farms. And so yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being with us, and watch for the recording, probably coming out in a couple of days. Please pass it along to your friends. Bye for now. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much, Philip.
Bye-bye.